And welcome everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at FileHold's archive, so the library archive as part of the system. Now, if you've used FileHold, you know the library archive is already part of your system. It's just right down there below the library. You can just see. I've just done a quick screenshot here. When we go live, we'll take a deeper dive into that. The idea behind the library archive is that it's a tool that's designed to help you to permanently preserve your documents. So it's intended as a final repository for essential documents or records. Now, what essential means is entirely up to you and your organization. Whether you're putting documents into there, records into there, any kind of content, anything that you can put into the library, you can also move into the archive. So there's no limitation on that. Once you archive a file, it cannot be deleted by any user. Even if they're an administrator, even if they're a system administrator, nobody can delete content from the archive. The whole point of the archive is to permanently preserve those documents in that state. Once you also add a document to the archive, it cannot be checked out or have the metadata edited. It is preserved in that state. So once we move a document from the active library and into there, they're permanently locked into that position. That's going to be those documents moving forward. So how to archive a document? There's effectively two ways to do it. You can either manually archive or you can do it as a system process. And I'm going to show you both of those today. When you do it manually, anyone who's a cabinet administrator, when you own the cabinet, when you're a library administrator, when you own the cabinet, or if you're a senior library administrator or a system administrator, any of those users can send a document manually to the library. So this is not something that users are doing. This is something designed, again, for one-time process, removing it from the active library and putting it into the archive. Now, the other way of doing this, and usually what we recommend doing, is an event. So an event will move the document from the active library and into the archive when the event transpires. So whether it's when the document was created or last modified. And again, we're going to take a look at these in a moment. Now, the other comment here is that there is no unarchive function. We can only move. So when you archive a document, when you move that the document either into the archive or when you take a document out, when you move it out, you change how FileHold's going to treat the document and it's going to give you a warning on that. We're going to see that in a moment. But it's just worth pointing out that there's nothing wrong with that. When you change the rights to the document, when you change how a document might be used, you are also therefore changing how somebody could be using the document later, so we always want to give you a warning on that because you're changing the rights and permissions to it. Hey, now somebody might be able to delete this document manually. Are you sure you want to make the move? It's all essentially that it's going to be doing. Now, what should be archived? What should go into the library? So remember, the FileHold Archive is designed to store documents in a permanent state as a resource for the organization to draw on in perpetuity or until the document no longer holds organizational value. So you're the only ones who can determine how long something should be archived for or when it should move from that active library and into there. So what an organization chooses to move to an archive is entirely at your discretion. We're not going to cover archival theory here today. It's a huge subject. It's it's an entire field of study unto itself. I don't want to start walking into archival theory. However, since you asked, archives in the Western tradition usually have three rules attached to it. There are three elements that we're looking for. This is from the Dutch manual, 19th century document, sort of outlines some of the basic principles of archiving. So something to be properly archived should have three elements to it. The first one is arrangement. We should understand how the archive is organized so that when we walk over to it, we're not looking at a random system. We are looking at something with order that is arranged and usually attempting to move towards an original order. There should be a description, which is terms or labels that identify that archive document or record and describe it in great detail so you can understand why it belongs into there. And it needs some level of provenance. Now in information management, they call this FOND. It's basically the origin. It's the record of ownership. It's what makes this document that document, what makes it part of the archive and why it should be in there. What is the history behind this that dedicates it to being into there? Now, those of you who are familiar with FileHold will know that arrangement roughly matches through to library structure. So the cabinet drawer and folder provides some level of arrangement. The schema also works for that as well. Our metadata helps to define the document. Schema also plays into that as well. and the provenance can be found within the audit record for the document. So when we move something from the active library and into the archive, we are following that tradition of archival theory. We're moving something into the proper area. So that's just a bit of background there to understand that we're not just treating the archive as this separate place where we're dumping documents. We're really treating it as something that allows you to control these and make sure that they are preserved for future access. So let's now take a step out of this. So I'm just going to hop out of my PowerPoint and let's go over and into FileHold. So we're going to just bring open the FDA. We're going to live in here today. Everything that I'm going to show you could also do through the web client, but we'll stick with the desktop application. And right now we're looking at the archive. So here I've got my library archive. I've got 2 cabinets. I'm in my accounting, we've got AP, and we've got 2 documents into here. First thing I want to point out, you can see these documents have this purpley, lavender, blue, I'm not sure whatever your monitor is going to display, but it has a very distinct color onto these documents for the dot in here. Just as a point of contrast, let's go back over to our accounting. Let's take a look at our 2020 folder over here, and we can see a whole bunch of documents with either a white dot, which indicates it's a record. And just as a refresher, for those who don't remember, when I select a record, I can delete it because I'm a system administrator. I can do that, but I can't make any changes to it. I can't check the document out because it's been preserved in this state. When I have the stoplight colors, this is indicating that this is a document. So as an owner of this document, you can see that I'm the owner over here, over on the version properties. Because I'm the owner of this, I could check the document out, and again, I could do deleting for it. But let's move back down into the archive, and when we click over here, we have a purple dot. So even though I'm a system admin, when I select one of these documents, let's just select one of them, there we go, I don't get the option to delete them. It's disabled for me within this interface. I also don't have the ability to check the document out. Again, that's been disabled because these are archived documents moving forward. You'll also see over here on the metadata section, I don't have an edit button. You may be used to in the metadata panel when you're the document owner, and again, I'm the owner of this, that there's a button here that I can press, and that allows me to edit the metadata. Our metadata is right now fixed because it's been moved into the archive. So when we archive content, we're automatically locking it in and preserving it in that state moving forward. Now, archiving a document is a very simple process when you have a right to do that. So again, because I'm a system admin, I could delete not delete, I shouldn't say that. I can preserve content when I want to. So here's a document, and I've decided that I want this to be archived moving forward. So it's a record. We know it's in its permanent state, so now we want to send this down into the archive. Now, I don't have to move this manually. I can just right-click on it, and then go to Send To and go to the library archive. Now, you may be wondering why that I have that as an option. You may not have it as on your system, even though you may have a right to do that. Let me show you. I'm going to go into my web administration panel. So let's just open that up directly here. And we're going to go down to our Settings General. Sorry, I lost my place there for a moment. So System Configuration, Settings General, and you'll see that I've got Enable Manually Archiving Documents and Enable Manually Unarchiving Documents. So I have both of those selected. I know you heard me say a moment ago that you can't unarchive a document. You can't, there's no unarchive process. We are simply undoing the archive for it. So it's not quite unarchiving. It's not as simple a visual tool, but it's the same principle. So we can manually archive, manually unarchive, must have those selected, need to be a system admin to get access to this. All right, so having said that, we're going to go back over to here. We right click, we go down to Send To, and we're going to send it to the library archive. Warning, selected documents, so move to the library archive. Do you wish to proceed? It's asking me this because once I move this document out of the active library and into the archive, it will no longer be accessible to people who are looking at the library. They have to go to the archive to find it. More importantly, you will lose your ability to delete the document and you lose the ability to make further changes to it. We are preserving this document moving forward. So we will say, okay, and off it goes. So it disappears from over here. And when I come down to my AP, we now see we've gained an AP 2020. And we have, here's our record, it's been brought over, and we can see that it's been kept with its name. Now, it's also important to notice, because this is a record, it's kept that white dot on it. Over here, these were documents that were brought over and they had the purple dot put onto them. So we can see a difference in how FileHold is handling those. All right, so here we can see our newly created part of the archive. And we also see that we've created the 2020 folder. Now, this is often something we get asked about. Why does FileHold, why does it create this structure behind it? Remember that the structure that you're creating, the cabinet and the folder, have less to do with organization. It's part of it, but it's not the entire story, and more to do with control. Who's allowed to see this document and what rights do they have to these documents? So by moving something from the active library into the archive, we mimic the structure, we're essentially cloning the structure over into the archive so that our document can be maintained in that state, and the same users who have a right to see that folder will still be able to see this folder over here. So we haven't changed the access of it. We've simply changed where it's going to be held in the repository visually. So it's still in the same place where it was before, but it's going to be displayed now in the archive, and it's going to be in a preserved state moving forward. So it's a fairly simple process to actually move something within there. Now, the other way of, rather than doing manually, we can also have FileHold do that process for us. We do that through an event. So this is a refresher. Those of you who've dealt with events before, this will be a review. There's other videos we've done on this if you want to take a deeper dive into it. But over here, I've got events. Now, by the way, I should mention, and what do I use to, there we go. I have, under my event schedule settings over here, I have enable archive events checked. And because I'm using them, it's grayed out, so I can't deselect this. But if you don't have archive events right now and you want to introduce them, you may need to come in here and turn this on. These are standard features for FileHold. Nothing we're looking at so far goes into the optional feature realm. If you have FileHold, you have this functionality right now. All right, we're gonna go back into the FDA. Sorry, there's the FDA. And we've got our list here, and I want to show you one that I made earlier, which was archive invoices after 3 years. It's a very simple use case that I'm doing. It's an archive event, and under my event properties, I have chosen the invoice date for this and a period of 3 years. So I'm saying that after 3 years' time, move this document from the active library down into the archive using the invoice date. Now, I could have used another field for that information. I could have used when the document was created. That would be just as valid. My logic here behind 3 years is, in the current year, I need to see this document. In the next year, I might have an audit, so I might want to access the document, and maybe the year afterwards, I might be referenceable material. You could argue with me that say, well, maybe I only want to keep an invoice in my active library for 2 years. I completely believe you. That's a very logical thing to lay out. In my case, I've used 3 years because it's simply convenient, and I decided 3 years, why not? Could have been 2, could have been 4, whatever makes the most sense. So I have my event that's been set up, and then we're going to cancel that, and we're just going to go into our document schemas, and we're going to take a look at our AP invoices historic, and we're going to go to our event schedule, and we'll see the archive invoice has been turned on over here. So for those who may not remember, you create the event, and then you associate the event template with the schema of your choice, which I've done over here. What this means is that all of my historic invoices, that's essentially what I'm using this for, once they hit that 3-year mark, they're going to move themselves automatically out of the library and place themselves over into the archive. And we can see that when we look at a document. Let's go back over to our 2020 folder, and we'll select this one. We can see down at the bottom, we have an archive date. This will archive on Friday, April 21st of 2023. So this will have archived by the next time. I just set this up this morning, so that's why it hasn't run yet. By tomorrow, this document will already be over there. If I go up here to the Berglund's document, May 7th, so in 2 days' time, this document is going to move itself into the archive again. We have that date built into it. So it's just going to naturally move itself over there on Sunday, and I don't need to worry about it any further. So again, we have the functionality built into the system, and it's ready to run for me. And this is the key idea behind the archives. It's going to move these documents for me automatically. So manually archiving documents, very simple. Event to archive documents, very simple. Getting them out of the system too is also a very easy process, but there is one small thing to mention onto this. Instead of unarchiving, if I go to send to, I don't see an unarchive option here. I have to use my copy or move function. So if I want to move this document to another place, I can do that. So before I do that, I want to have a landing pad for this. Let's assume that I didn't have this content that was over here. So I've got a folder that I made. This is from a previous demo that I did. So I have a location. What we're going to do is we're going to head down to our archive. We're going to take our freshly unarchive or freshly archived document, and we're going to move this back over to our active library. So we're going to put it into our document repository there, and it gives me an alert again. And the reason it's giving me the alert is because I am opening up this record to be able to be deleted manually in the future. People might be able to edit the metadata for it. I am making this now in an editable state, and it's out of the archive. So it's giving me a warning onto that. I'm going to say, okay, the document is gone from over here. Now, one of the things that we do when we move a document out is we're often left with the structure behind. So I still have my 2020 document over here. So if I right click onto this and I delete the folder, it's gone. And it just flashes and it disappears. And the reason it's gone is because I've deleted it and there's no content in it, so it didn't give me a warning. When we delete a cabinet, we sometimes get a warning that will pop up on screen saying, warning, you are now deleting a cabinet. Are you sure that you want to be doing this? Now, I wanted to mention that because if I was to come over here to where I have my documents in the area and I was to delete this, let's delete this folder, I'm going to get this. I'm going to get a warning pops up that says I'm about to delete the folder and all items contained shall be deleted. This action cannot be undone. Do you wish to proceed? Okay. So some of the documents couldn't be deleted, probably because they're going through a workflow process, or they're not, yeah, this one's going through a workflow, so it can't be deleted. And so we can see all the documents that could be deleted have been pulled out of there. So now if I wanted to pull those back out of the system, I'd have to go over to my recover documents, and I can select my documents that need to be recovered. Here's 1, 2, and recover them. And then they appear back over to here. So when we delete a document, when we purge a document out of the system, any of the structure is now attached to that document. So if I delete structure and then recover the document, the structure returns with it. So I always like pointing that out to people. And the same thing happens over here with the archive. When I delete it of here and it's empty, it's not recoverable. If I delete a document, on the other hand, that's been archived, you won't be able to do that. So that's why it never comes up. But if you delete the structure, then you can actually delete the document. So you want to be careful with that, because if I right click onto this over here and ask to delete the folder, it's going to let me delete the folder even though there's a record in there, even though there's part of the archive has already been built into the system. Sorry if that sounds confusing. Essentially, the key point is you can't manually delete a document, but you can delete the structure that a document lives in. So you want to be careful about that. All right. So we've now looked at getting a document into the archive. The big question is, why would you want to archive beyond preservation? There's a second very valuable reason for why using the archive can be so essential, and it's very simple, and it has to do with search. So for example, let's go back down over to here and take a look at my document. So I've got a document here with Mother Hubbards. So we know we can see the word Mother Hubbard. So if I come over to my search function, let's just do a simple search for myself, and we're going to look for the word mother, and we're going to run a simple search, and it finds several documents. Now it's found this one over here, which is in my accounting AP 2020, but it's not inside of my archive. So it's simply another document that happens to have that name for it. The reason we might want to use the archive additionally is to help clear up old documents. Think back to those invoices that I had that I was showing you before. I put a 3-year policy onto that. After 3 years, operationally, that document has less value. We talk about when it comes to records, a record can be in what's called a semi-active state. It's not used on a day-to-day basis, but it's used on occasion, or it needs to be kept just in retention. Then they can become inactive. You need to keep them, but no longer are they being used. That's another purpose towards the archive. So it's not that that document isn't there, it's that I have to include the archive in the search and then run my search again. And now it finds my archive document, which we can tell right here because it's got that purple dot in front of it to indicate, hey, this is archived content that's within the system. Now, because this is the same structure, it looks like it's in the same location, but we know that this is actually an archived document because of that symbol that's in front of it. So our reason for using the archive is both to preserve information, and it's also to ensure that that information isn't cluttering up your system. We're keeping these invoices for 7 years because that is our retention period. I must keep them for 7 years in case of an audit. After that, they can and probably should be destroyed. I should remove them from my system because they no longer offer me any organizational value. However, Keeping them for 7 years inside the active library, if this is a company that I do a lot of business with, every time I run a search for it, I'm going to be tripping over the old documents that no longer serve functional day-to-day value, but offer retention value. That being the case, I want to move them out of my active library, put them into the archive. They're still under retention, they're still under control, they're still accessible, but I'm not tripping over them every time I come over to my search. They're still accessible for me within the system.